Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for being here. It's an honor to be with all of you on this sunny afternoon in Stikine, Tlingit on the present and ancestral homelands of the Akwang Tlingit peoples. My name is Brianna Walker. I am the director of Salmon Beyond Borders. Salmon Beyond Borders is an Alaska-based campaign that works with community members, fishermen, concerned citizens, alongside tribes and First Nations to defend our transboundary rivers, salmon, and way of life. It is my pleasure to introduce President Richard Peterson Chaatyaish this afternoon. Richard Chaatyaish Peterson is Tlingit Haida from the Kagwantan clan. He grew up in Kasan, Alaska, and is a lifelong Alaska native of Southeast Alaska. He has served as president of Tlingit Haida since 2014, the largest federally recognized tribe in Alaska with over 35,000 tribal citizens.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the Akwang and our neighboring Taku Kwan and say Jóonax for allowing us to conduct our meetings on their traditional lands. As stated, my name is Shtax'héen, Richard Peterson, and I do serve as the president of Central Council Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska. Tlingit Haida is the largest tribe in Alaska with over 35,000 tribal citizens worldwide. Tlingit Haida is unique as it is a regional tribe representing our southeast communities. Our ancestral homelands extend as far north as Yakutat and south as far as Prince of Wales Island. Our relations extend beyond the borders into the interior and south to Haida Gwaii in British Columbia. The clean water, our shared transboundary rivers, have nourished our indigenous peoples here since time immemorial, and it is our responsibility to ensure these rivers can provide for generations to come. Our wild salmon and Ulugan populations are struggling. We must do everything we can to protect these resources that are the fabric of our culture. The conservation of these resources is an expression of our inherent sovereignty. We feel tailing dams are too risky for what is at stake, and Tlingit Haida does not support BC's permitting and construction of tailing dams upstream of communities and sensitive salmon habitat. We have adopted a resolution that supports a permanent ban on these earthen dams as they are prone to fail. Tlingit Haida must be at the table with all levels of government, and therefore we urge the U.S. government to secure a temporary pause on new permits for BC mines until binding and international agreements are in place. Today, the BC representatives made a commitment to work with us, and we will hold them to account. We will continue our work to rebuild our relationships with First Nations that have been divided by the colonial border. And we will continue to urge our federal government to address not only the economic or the only concerns of downstream tribes in Southeast Alaska, but those of downstream tribes in Washington, Idaho, and Montana who face impacts from BC mining as well, and those brothers and sisters with whom we stand in solidarity. We thank you for this opportunity to share our concerns.
Jóonax, Brianna, and President Peterson. My Tlingit name is Kahaku. I'm a brown bear Tekwidi from Yakutat, a child of the Quashkakwan, which is the humpback salmon people in Yakutat. I'm chairman of the board at Sealaska, and Sealaska is our regional corporation in Southeast. We've got 25,000 shareholders now. Many of those 25,000 shareholders, like me, are also members of Tlingit Haida, and our shareholders are living in all 50 states and about 7 or 8 different countries around the world, but we all have our roots right here in our traditional villages in Southeast. And every one of our villages is very literally salmon people. Half our clans are salmon clans and watercress clans, and it's thousands and thousands of years of indigenous stewardship that has gotten us to where we're at right now. And as a modern corporation built on ancient values, it really is our duty to ensure we protect our traditional ways of life and pass those on to our grandkids. So this is a very important issue that we're standing with our tribes and really here for the long haul to build good relationships and make healthy decisions that actually address forward-looking problems, but in real time deal with the real issues in the moment. Sealaska is a global business. We've built our businesses in the last few years around ocean health. Seafood is a part of a platform. We do believe seafood really will help the world be a healthier place. If people eat more seafood, that's just a better thing to do for the planet. And another part of our businesses are around hydrosciences and shifting to alternative energies. So we're at the table the best we can be to help manage these issues and look forward and just really to ensure that decisions are made with the best interest of our grandchildren at the forefront. And I hate to say it, but really, if I only came thinking of putting 2 words on the table today, it's Mount Polly. And that's just something that is going to live forever. And we know the image that has now. So thank you for your leadership, President Peterson, and Brianna, and the folks around the table here.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to pass the mic to Representative Dan Ortez from Ketchikan.
Thank you very much. My name is Dan Ortez, and I represent Southern Southeast Alaska as a state representative. That includes from Wrangell, Alaska, down through Ketchikan over to Metlakatla. It includes Kaufman Cove, Whale Pass, and as far south as Hyder, Alaska. And it's truly an honor and a privilege for me to be with you all today, because we stand together in connection with the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes, Sealaska, Salmon Beyond Borders, and we stand in unity as here a handful of stand in unity on this very, very important issue that's facing all of our communities, our fishermen, our traditional users of resources that come from our waters here in Alaska, and particularly in Southeast Alaska. And it's just been an important issue for me personally since the time I arrived as a state legislator, which is now over 8 years ago. And it's time that we actually see some progress being made in terms of putting forward some real protections out there so that our way of life can continue to exist long into the future for our children, for our grandchildren. Yeah, it's time. So not only are we here in unity today, but some of us legislators are sending a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken requesting federal intervention in this important issue. We are asking the United States federal government to utilize their authority under the United States-Canada Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 to create a binding international agreement. It's really simple. We've heard loud and clear from constituents that Alaskans need enforceable protections. Over 100 Alaskan tribes, municipalities, commercial and sports fishing businesses and organizations, and thousands of Alaskans have written letters and passed resolutions asking for the Boundary Waters Treaty to be invoked. We want to join with these thousands of voices in calling for that action. So thank you all for the opportunity to stand with you today on this very important issue. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my esteemed colleague from Juneau.
Thank you, Representative Sarah Hannon. Honored to be here today, working with my friends, my neighbors, my fishing friends on an issue that all of us are committed to doing better on. I am in my 5th year of being a legislator, and I will tell you from the moment that I was sworn in till today, I've been told repeatedly by our governing agencies, we're on this, we have a fix. The Tulsa Chief mine remains not cleaned up. Canadians here this week say there'll be field work and cleaning up that this summer. Our state agency folks involved with it, along with British Columbia agency governors, say they've been working diligently on joint issues of transboundary monitoring, but They've not invited our tribes to the table. They've not included us in the dialogues. They've not shared the minutes of their meetings publicly. So although they contend they have very regular working group meetings making progress, that progress in is isolation from the fishermen and the communities that are the most active and concerned. And then I will say that I'm also very disappointed when our state agencies say, what we know is that when water gets to the US border, it meets our clean water standards. Well, the border is not where fish are raised or reared. They pass through the border, and a mixing zone quality standard for clean water may pass an EPA standard, but it does not pass habitat standards for rearing fish in perpetuity. And so my constituents remain concerned about the cumulative effects, the ongoing negation of public involvement in the issues and solutions, and remind our state agencies that we want the Secretary of State involved. We want government to government actionable decision-making. And if we can't do it at the state level, and if we aren't engaging our tribes, then we need federal to federal dialogues that require engagement of our First Nations folks. With that, Rebecca Himshoot of Sitka is to my right, and I'll pass it to her.
Thank you, Rep. Hannon. My name is Rebecca Himshoot. I am honored to be the representative from the incomparable House District 2, stretching from Yakutat to Heidelberg and Kasan on Prince of Wales. And the communities that I get to advocate for could not be more tied to a healthy ocean, and a healthy ocean is tied to healthy rivers. So in my previous life as an assembly member, I did quite a bit of work on the issues that we're talking about today. And wherever we can use the force of our positions to work in partnership with the tribes and First Nations of Canada, I think we're all at the table and ready to help. So I was happy to have representation from Canada in Juneau this week. I think those are good steps forward. But let's make sure we have every possible protection in place. So whatever that takes is what we need to do. So I think that we're going in a good direction, but there's a lot more we can do on this issue. And I welcome the opportunity to work on this together.
Thank you so much, all of you. I'm not sure that there's much I can add following all of you wonderful leaders, but I'd like to thank you all for your leadership. And I'd also just like to add that our wild salmon, our clean water, our sustainable economies and ways of life here in Southeast Alaska are too valuable for us to gamble with, especially when the science is clear that BC's mine waste dams will fail, just like they have done before. These are ticking time bombs that rival the size and the scale of the proposed Pebble mine in Bristol Bay. And we urge the Biden administration to listen to tribes, communities, fishermen, lawmakers, and individual Alaskans, and to take swift action to ensure that these requests are heard. Thank you all so much. I think we will open it up now for questions. Can we have a runner? Yeah. So that.
So just to everybody on Zoom, we have several news organizations on Zoom, and of course we have one here in the room. If you want to put a question or just raise your hand or just say that you want to be called on in the chat, you can ask your question yourself. You're also welcome to put the question in the chat, and one of us can read it out for you.
Okay, Mark Sabatini, Juneau Empire. This is a question for President Peterson, although of course anybody else here can chime in if they have thoughts on this. You said that BC representatives made a commitment to work with you. Can you provide some specifics of what it is they're working with you on? And when you say hold them accountable, on what kind of timeline and what way would you hold them accountable?
Sure, thank you. Just today, this morning, they met, the ministers met with us in our offices. We're excited to see that. We're excited to have that conversation. But, you know, politics being what they are, administrations change. We've had those conversations before. And the broken promises are that we would work together. You know, we've had past ministers come and meet with us. And broken promises are about doing something, about action, about making sure that standards are raised to a level that we believe protect us and our way of life. And I'm greatly concerned, you know, somebody mentioned, I think it was Representative Hannon mentioned the border and how they say the water is at the right standards there. I had a past minister say to me in a meeting, you know, many years ago, when I raised the question of Ooligan and the declining runs there, well, the runs are strong on our side. And I'm not the kind of person to say that to, because I'm going to challenge you. And I can be a bit facetious, but very direct and meaningful. I just asked, well, I didn't know that the border was magic and fish multiplied when they magically crossed this border. And that was a kind of a smart aleck answer, but it was because I felt so disrespected. And today I will give the ministers the credit today. I felt seen, I felt heard, but I'm an action person. So you have to show me. And we've committed to quarterly meetings. I've committed to traveling to Canada. You know, our native lands and resources have been doing water quality sampling on many of these rivers for years. We challenged them to utilize that data with their own. And I felt like they agreed that they would. We've had our tribal leadership, Vice President Rob Sanderson and Vice President Will Micklin, for years advocating on these issues. We've traveled to Canada, we've traveled to the lower 48 to have these meetings, and we've been made these promises where we feel like they've been really let down. So I'm hoping that today's a new day, that being seen and heard means something to them, that when they made those commitments, that they will do their utmost best to keep them.
Thank you. So apparently when I gave instructions for reporters to ask questions, I didn't follow my own instructions and hold the microphone. So reporters on Zoom, if you have questions, please feel free to either type them into the chat, or you know, you can just say that you have a question and unmute yourself, and then you can ask the question to the room.
We're waiting for questions.
Yeah.
That's great. I did realize there is one thing that I neglected to mention, which is that this resolution that Tlingit Haida has passed and that the legislators in the room are supporting has also been passed by 9 municipalities in Southeast Alaska. So those are resolutions calling for an immediate and temporary pause on BC mine permits in the Taku, Stikine, and Unuk until there is a binding international agreement in place that is put together by tribes, First Nations, communities, lawmakers at both the legislative level and the municipal level. And other tribes in Southeast Alaska have passed those resolutions as well. So I just wanted to bring that to light. And Rep. Himshoot was one of the municipal leaders who helped pass a resolution in Sitka.
Great, thanks. We do have one question in the chat for President Peterson. It's from Margie Bauman with the Cordova Times and Fisherman's News. She wants to know, how much time do you think is fair to give British Columbia to clean up the Tulsa Chief mine?
Well, I think they've already exceeded that time. It's really unacceptable that this has gone on for this long. You know, we talk about our way of life and healthy communities. Southeast Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska is dependent on the fisheries, both from a traditional and cultural standpoint to an economic standpoint. And just a socioeconomic standpoint, this is the way of life for Gulf of Alaskans. And so it should be expeditious, and they're well over that time. So I can't give an answer where I said, oh, well, 2 years or 3 years. It's already been too long. So now.
You want to, yes, please.
If I can add to President Peterson's answer, as I mentioned, when I arrived here a little over 8 years ago now, this was the issue. They were saying I met with Minister Bennett, who is the BC Minister of Mines, I believe, as well as the Lieutenant Governor Malat, and we had meetings at that time, and that was the issue: was the cleanup of that mine, of the Tussaqueech Chief mine site, and they said they're going to get right on it, and that was over 8 years ago. So I think it's fair for President Peterson to say they've exceeded the amount of time that would be reasonable to expect for the cleanup to happen, and it's a mystery to me why it hasn't. But anyway, it's past time. Thank you.
I was just going to add to that a little bit. And I remember in August of last year, we were awaiting the hurdle of the receivership, and we got past that hurdle. So not only is it past time, but we're out of excuses. So I think I can support everything that everybody's saying today. And it's nice to go forward in partnership, but I think we also need to make sure our voices are heard unequivocally.
Thank you. All right, next question in the chat is from Francesca Fionda with the Narwhal. It's a question for Representative Hannon. She asks, can you expand on the lack of transparency from the British Columbia government regarding cleanup plans at the Tulsa Chief? How have they responded to these frustrations?
I would say that probably they've been led to believe by state officials that this information is being shared. In meeting with BC officials this week and our commissioner of DEC in the same meeting, they spoke that they have very regular bilateral working group meetings on a very regular basis. They were amazed that I did not know this. They were assured that there was just a communication error on the state's part not to share that publicly. But again, I went to the first meeting formally as a legislator on the Tulsa cleanup in August of 2019 when the minister was here and the Joint Commission was being talked about. And we were assured it was on the brink of happening. And apparently for the last 4 years, there's been a working group, but there are no public notifications, no invitations, no agendas shared, no minutes of those meetings. So, I would say it's not the BC regulators' job to do that in Alaska, but if they believe that Alaskans are informed, I would say a few Alaskan agency people are informed, but the Alaskan public has not been engaged nor informed of those. And we've asked.
Yeah, it's concerning when we hear reports and that we're informed. Yesterday, they made a report at the mining symposium or whatever the mining group meeting is, that they were in working relationship with the tribes here in Southeast Alaska, and we've never had that correspondence, and we let them know that today. Again, they were shocked to hear that, but I'm not going to judge that. I don't know if that was disingenuous or not, or genuine shock, but we have not had those communications. And if you're going to be meeting in Alaska and the tribes, the lawmakers, the corporations, nobody's showing up, you have to believe it's because they don't know. And I think when you look around the table today, I feel very uplifted by the fact that pretty much every level is represented here in tribe, corporation, state lawmakers. You know, we know through that the municipalities have adopted these. There's absolutely no way that leaving Alaska from this trip, they can believe that again. And I hope that they do better. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and hope and believe they do.
Great. Next question, we have a hand up from KSTK. So I am just going to go ahead and unmute you or ask you to unmute yourself. Feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Sage Smiley from KSTK in Wrangell. I have a couple of clarifying questions. First of all, when we're talking about they, which BC ministers are we speaking of? And I guess you don't have to give specific names right now, but I would love to hear which members of the provincial government were in Juneau and who met with who, kind of a thing, just to, you know, make sure that's attributed correctly.
Thanks, Sage. This is Brianna Walker. We had 2 assistant deputy ministers from the BC Ministry Energy of Mines. We can get you the full titles of both of them. Salmon Beyond Borders met with them. I believe those same folks also met with President Peterson today, and they also met with the legislators that we have in the room here. And again, we'll follow up with specific details for the individuals that we met with and their titles.
Okay, great.
We met with Laurel Nash and Andrew Rollo, and they're both assistant deputy ministers, but we can, again, we'll give you their specific titles in detail.
Go ahead, Sage.
I was also hoping we could get the specific Southeast communities that have signed on to that resolution as well.
Definitely.
And if that doesn't need to happen now, I can get that later.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with a list for you, Sage. Again, this is Brianna Walker. I can tell you right now off the top of my head that the Ketchikan Gateway Borough, the Petersburg Assembly, the Wrangell Assembly, the Sitka Assembly, the Craig Assembly, Gustavus City Council, Tenakee City Council. Did I already say Craig?
You did that, Pelican.
Pelican, thank you. And I'm sure that I'm leaving one off. There's 9, so I could be counting, but I will follow up with a full list after this. But I would say it's a pretty resounding call from across the municipalities from Southeast calling for that pause in permits and permanent ban on tailings dams.
And then I guess my other numbers, names, titles type question would just be beyond the letter that's being sent by the state legislature to the provincial government asking for this, the federal government asking for federal intervention in this. What are next steps? I know that there have been next steps for years on the transboundary mining issue, but what is looking forward, the emphasis going to be from either on the corporation side, on the central council side, or on the state legislature side to continue to push this issue of further protections and inclusivity in the discussion of protections for transboundary mining potential dangers?
This is Rep. Hannon. I guess I can punt on the first part in that the state legislature of Alaska has no direct legal authority to permit nor decline actions. So all we can do is express support and efforts. And I guess that's probably why we're calling on our federal government, because both our state and our federal government have said they will consult with tribes on international boundary issues that impact their tribes. And so all we can do is lift up and affirm that we support that effort, that the indigenous people of this place have a legal right and standing to be heard and consulted in the process. We as legislators can jump up and down, but we don't have standing to make those decisions. I'll pass.
One question that I also asked in our meetings was to confirm that we have the staff in place in the agencies who would do the water quality testing and whatever we can do on our side, that we're not somehow having vacancy rates so high that this isn't important enough to be done. So that's another lever that we have in the legislature that we'll keep pushing on. But I'd like to pass it to either Joe or President Peterson.
Thank you. Well, I want to add, so I think the resolution is very self-explanatory. We want a binding international agreement and one that considers First Nation and tribal voices as well as our municipal voices. Central Council has been gathering data, water quality in these rivers for years. It's valid, scientifically taken, it's defensible, and they made a commitment today to take it and use it. And so we want to see them do that. This has been a federally funded project that we've been doing. Senator Murkowski has secured those fundings for Central Council for years. We do a very thorough and good job. So that data exists. We don't need anybody else to be doing it separately. We're already doing it. So it's there. And I think that's really important to recognize as well, right? That the data has been collected. And when we talk about what do we want to see, what timelines, again, they should be cleaning. I mean, tomorrow there should be crews starting to stage and go out and clean the Tulska Chief mine. That's also something, again, as we've heard repeatedly from Representative Ortiz, Hannon, these promises have been being made for years. And nothing's happened, and they're still contaminated. So that's first, and then the agreement. Central Council, Tlingit and Haida is divided by this border. We have Tlingits in the interior in Yukon. We have Tlingit, Taku River Tlingits. We have Haida and Haida Gwaii in BC. We are a nation divided by somebody else's lines. And we should have a voice. We should be the ones being consulted and considered when we talk about the impacts of mines.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Not to belabor, but just since at the table, for Sealaska, we're not a sovereign either. We don't pretend to be a government. We're here supporting the tribe as landowners with a common history, common connection, and we happen to be in the business of remediating things too, though. So we can help once things do start happening from just a business perspective.
Mark, did you have a question? Okay.
I've heard concerns expressed about some happenings with Canadian authorities. I've also concerns expressed about what's going on with the relationship with the state government. Can you give a sense of what are the biggest challenges you're facing with either of those? I mean, in other words, is one entity bigger than the other? And if there's simply different challenges, what are the priorities in tackling the issues you have to deal with both Canada and the state of Alaska?
It's an interesting question, and one others might be able to elaborate a little more on. From Central Council's standpoint, the federal government has, especially our congressional delegation, has been on the same page on this for the last decade, easily. The state of Alaska has as well in voice. I don't necessarily feel an action when you see, some of the support they've gotten. So, maybe Representative Ortiz might have, or one of those might have something more, but here's one of the biggest problems that we run into. When we go to meet, and I've traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the Canadian consulate, we've gone to Victoria, We've met with the Canadian government, but they have absolutely no obligation to act or do anything on anything we say because we're in the United States. So Central Council's taking the tact, okay, you may not have to listen to us, but we still have Tlingit and Haida governments in their country, and those are our brothers and sisters, and we're going to work very hard, as we should, for a plethora of reasons, but especially on this issue, we need to reestablish those relationships and build stronger relationships. Also, we need to do that with all the other First Nations there, because they're the ones who really have the right to talk to their Canadian government, to talk to the province, to talk, beyond. And so we're building those relationships. We've been attending meetings for years with the other First Nations and tribes. The tribes here in Southeast have banded together, about 8-9 years ago, created an organization to do some of the work. Some of the tribes do some of the work on their own. I can tell you again, I've mentioned Vice President Robert Sanderson from Shtax'héen has been a tireless advocate. He's chaired some of these work groups. He's been doing that work, but it's been a decade and nothing's changed. That's the problem. So to sit across the table right now with some of our representatives is a little more uplifting to know that at least somebody is saying, hey, what's happening here? And I heard in the comments already, I don't think they're satisfied with what some of the actions of the state.
I'll add to that. I think to build off of everything that has been said today, there's two sort of processes. There's one process that's in place right now, according to the province of BC and the state of Alaska, and that's a provincial to state agreement through the memorandum of understanding. And I think everyone here has addressed that there could certainly be improvements to that. That was the theme of the conversation that we had with BC officials today, how communication could be improved, transparency. And what's needed in addition to that MOU state to province process is a parallel federal to federal process that ensures tribes and First Nations are at the table and in the lead, that municipalities and lawmakers downstream have a say, and that everyone is coming together and that there is some accountability in place. And I think that is what has stood out to me from everyone's comments, right? There's nothing bad about having a state provincial process. And in fact, we encourage that. We just are also asking, Salmon Beyond Borders is supporting these requests for a federal to federal process as well.
Great. We have a couple more questions lined up in the chat. One more from Margie Bauman. She asks, how many mines are there along the transboundary rivers operating now, and how many planned? Have you asked for impartial environmental experts to inspect these mines periodically? When he was running for office, Senator Dan Sullivan mentioned having contacts in Ottawa and was going to help resolve these issues. What role has Senator Sullivan had in trying to resolve these issues?
I asked the Canadian visitors, how many mines are we talking about? And they said operating, there's only one, and planned, there are 6 total. I take them at their word, but I'd like somebody else to confirm that.
In terms of the actual number, I'm not sure. That seemed like
So the watersheds that we're talking about are the Taku, Shtax'héen, and Unuk. The Iskit is the largest tributary of the Stikine River, and the majority of the riparian corridor of the Iskit is staked with mineral claims. So while there is one mine operating at the headwaters of the Iskit, the Red Chris mine, we are talking about dozens of potential mines that are in or near the headwaters of the Taku, Stikine, and Iskit. There's multiple that are either in permitting or near permitting. There's numbers that are in development. And then we, of course, have the Tulskwa Chief that's been abandoned. So we can get you more details about that as well, Margie, with specific names and follow-up. Can you repeat the rest of the question?
Yes.
She also had a question about, so have you asked for impartial environmental experts to inspect these mines periodically? And then I'll go to there's a third one.
What I would say to that, Margie, is that there is a process in BC that they have for how their mines are inspected, and we can follow up with you for details on that. It's a complicated issue, being that this is a different jurisdiction, right? So BC ultimately has authority over the regulatory structure in place as it currently stands.
Third question was about Senator Sullivan and what role he's had in resolving these issues.
Do you want to take it?
I will just say that when I was at the meeting in August of 2019, Dan Sullivan articulated strongly, emphasized the Tulsa chief needed to be cleaned up immediately. The minister who was there, it was on the brink of it. So at least from the perspective of an elected, in the time frame that I've been involved, he's articulated it in much the same way. We expect that to be cleaned up. Now, I have no idea what communications he has on an ongoing basis or commitment beyond that, but he has publicly and adamantly talked about a mine that is a legacy mine that is continuing to pollute is the obligation of cleanup of our neighbors in BC and the expectation that it would be done.
Thanks, Rep. Hannon. This is Brianna Walker again, and I'd just like to add to that our congressional delegation has a history of being leaders on this issue and coming out and asking for many of the things. It was mentioned by President Peterson that Senator Murkowski has done a lot of great work to ensure that there's federal appropriations for water quality monitoring on these rivers. Senator Sullivan has a long history of expressing concern and frustration around Tulsa Chief Mine. And the late Congressman Young had also joined his fellow members of the Alaska Congressional Delegation in expressing concern. They have sent letters to the BC Premier. They've sent letters to the US federal government on this issue, and we're happy to follow up and provide the record with those letters as well.
And in regards to the question about mineral claims as well, I'll just point out, I think all of you on the Zoom got a media advisory, and we'll soon be getting a press release. Those at the bottom have a link to a map of mineral claims in these 3 watersheds, so you should be able to see them. All right, we have one more question from Caroline James with the Wrangell Sentinel. She asks, what are the steps required for getting a binding international agreement established and enforced? Are there any similar agreements that you might be looking to as a template?
That's a great question. So there is a treaty that exists between the US and Canada, and that is the Boundary Waters Treaty. And that is the treaty that has been referenced in all of these resolutions and letters calling for action. The governing body of that treaty is the International Joint Commission. And so the request has been for this issue to be referred to the International Joint Commission so that they can do their job, which is ensure that water is not polluting, to water that flows to either side of the border is not polluted, and that they can convene all of these groups that have weighed in and asked to be involved, predominantly tribes and First Nations, and ensure that there's a process in place through which binding and enforceable protections could be established. So that's a bit of a long answer, but it is a request for federal engagement to refer this issue to the IJC, and then from there, you move forward to move towards binding protections.
Great. We don't have any questions currently in the chat or raised hands, I believe. I'll give one more call if anybody here on the Zoom or here in person has any more questions. I'll bring it over to Mark.
I know at least some of you were at the Jóonax Mining Forum yesterday, where those two visiting Canadian officials, along with the commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation, was there. They gave their explanation to what's going on with the Tulska cleanup, essentially saying, look, we're doing everything possible, but it's not happening as fast as some would like, because there's issues of access, making sure the right people are doing the right cleanup in a responsible way. The commissioner said something to the effect of course, it's in our interest to get this done, because it's used as an excuse to hold up other mining projects. I say all this because I'd like you to respond to that, because you've made the obvious comment of this is not getting cleaned up. We want it cleaned up. This is their rebuttal. So I'm essentially asking you to continue that conversation and give me your response to their comments yesterday.
The contamination of the Tulska chief should not be used as a political football. When I hear those kind of responses, that's politics. That's the wrong answer. The answer should be we're doing everything we can and we're going to be out there cleaning this season. That's the only acceptable answer. I think to politicize it, to make it about whether this is used to stop or green light or red light, another mine should be irrelevant. Another mine shouldn't be considered until they can demonstrate that they can clean up their mess here. You know, I've sat in meetings where I've heard industry talk about tailings dams, and they talk about the life cycle of them, and they talk about, you know, bonding them. And I'm an indigenous person of these lands. We think in a generational capacity. They're thinking of in dollars and cents, and when they can pass on the responsibility. They've talked, you know, we've talked about Mount Poly. That was one of the largest disasters in the industrial history. And they want to use the same blueprint for that tailings and other mining operations that will affect us. That's not okay. Don't make this a political issue. This should be simple. Whatever political leanings, whether you're pro-industry or against industry, you should want clean water. You should want systems that support healthy habitat, healthy and strong returns of salmon that will rear and spawn for generations to come. That's the bottom line. Making excuses just passes the ball down the field.
I just wanted to reference Senator Keel, who facilitated the meeting yesterday. And I believe he said something along the lines of, from Tulska Chief to the border, it's a pretty big mixing zone to leave out there. Just wanted to bring those words into the room. And then to build off of what President Peterson just said, and a question earlier about the number of mines, size and scale, right? In the Unuk in particular, there's already one underground mine that's operating, Bruce Jack Mine. The KSM mine that is in development less than 25 miles from the border is 28 times the size of the Mount Poly mine, which has been referenced a number of times today. And if built as proposed, it would be on par with the largest mine in North America. And just across the river from that is the Eskay Creek mine, which is in the permitting process to be revitalized and turned into an open pit mine with tailings dams. So that's just to build on what President Peterson is saying. This is a very real present thing that is happening right now within these watersheds.